Welcome to Life and Whiskey, and as always, I'm Jordan. This is video number 4 of my How to Hunt Elk series, and today, for our whiskey of the day that we're going to be reviewing, it is the Evan Williams 1783. They call it a small batch. That doesn't really mean anything. It's a Kentucky straight bourbon, and it's with a straight whiskey. What that means is aged at least 2 years. It's a non-age statement whiskey, which means that it has to be at least 4 years old in order to get the non-age statement classification, where they don't have to put an age on the bottle. It is running in at 43% ABV or 86 proof. It's a Heaven Hill product, and so it's another Evan Williams product, which so with this elk hunting series, I'm running through the available Evan Williams products that I can find here in town. Has the same exact mash bill as all the other Evan Williams products, 75% corn, 13% rye, 12% barley. Yeah, I picked it up for $11.99 here in town. It's pretty much, from what I've found, it's pretty much exactly the same as the black label, which I picked up for $10.49. Same proof, same mash bill, slightly different flavor profile, but not enough that it would be, it's maybe like 5% difference. So if you think you want to try something like this, I'd recommend going to the black label. But here we go. Here are the tasting notes on this, and then we'll get into elk hunting. So, forward, I get caramel, really light though, mostly corn, a little bit of cherry, kind of that medicinal cherry I've been talking about with the other Evan Williams. Get a little bit of spice in there, some vanilla. You can almost pick out an herb in there, but I already poured this, so it's been sitting for a little while, and it's opened up a bit more than it had originally. Has a really nice note, a lot of character in there. Let's see if we get any of that on the taste here. So the taste does not really bring forward everything that I got in the nose. It's a little bit disappointing, but it's still really good. It's fairly thin. You get a really heavy corn dust or corn flavor in there. Slight bit of that cherry, but not very much. More vanilla than anything, and not a sweet vanilla. It's like vanilla extract vanilla, and almost a little bit of caramel, but it's kind of hard to pick through it. Moves straight into the finish, and the finish goes from like a sweet and corn flavor, kind of mid palate, into a spicy and oak spice, peppery flavor in there. It's pretty short. It's a little bit spiky, but going back to it, you can pick out a nuttiness in there, kind of in that mid palate. So if I was going to describe the flavor profile, it comes off sweet and vanilla, but the sweet is pretty downplayed. It's mostly vanilla, and then it goes into corn, and then off of that corn, which has a sweet underlaying to it, into a short barrel oakiness, and kind of finishes out. Whole flavor, maybe 7 seconds on the palate, something like that. Anyways, if you think that sounds interesting to you, go ahead, pick up a bottle. If you want to save yourself the extra $1 or $2, pick up the black label. It's pretty much the same. Again, I got it for $11.99 here in town. Please put in the comments below, what were you able to find the Evan Williams 1783 for in your area? And then if you have any other comments or questions, feel free to throw those down there too. So sorry that these have been getting really long. This one's going to be another long one. Probably all these elk hunting ones are going to be fairly long. There's a lot of information I want to get out there, and it's hard to really kind of break it down and parse it out into separate videos. If I were to do it, honestly, I could probably make about 15-minute videos. But right now, I'm just kind of throwing this out there. If you have any questions about anything, whether it be the whiskey or anything about the elk hunting stuff, feel free, leave a comment below. I'll try and get to it. Right now, this channel is extremely small, so it's pretty easy to get to any comments that are inquiring about anything. If you want me to circle around back to any stuff, throw that down there. Again, because this channel is new, please like, subscribe, and hit all notifications on the little notification bell. Please help me grow this channel, and I'd like to grow it in a direction that you guys like. So if you like the whiskey reviews but not so much the content, or if you like the content and not so much the whiskey reviews, you want me to separate them out, or any ideas you have or things that you want to see or would like to see, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you guys and see where that takes us. So I'm going to continue sipping on this as we kind of go through a fair number of items that I would like to put out there. The number one thing, I think that if you're brand new to elk hunting, or even if you're not, if you want to increase your success, the number one thing is to grow your knowledge base. Really become a student of elk and elk behavior. That will help you figure out a lot of the key pieces that'll help you find the elk. And in order to kill an elk, you need to find an elk, and oftentimes that is the most difficult part of elk hunting. If you can at least find the elk, if you manage to not kill an elk, it's probably because of some little detail that you overlooked, or a mistake that you made. For me personally, I take note of all the blown opportunities I have and all the mistakes I've made. I do my best to keep a journal and highlight those mistakes so that I, attempt not to make those mistakes again year after year. But invariably, you're going to end up doing that. So, learn the habits of those animals, what they're typically doing, and then you can take that knowledge and apply it across the board to any state, any zone that you hunt. There will be some intricacies that you're going to have to figure out once you narrow it down to a specific location, but across the board, elk behavior is fairly similar from location to location. So if you can figure out their basic behavior and habits, you can apply that to most locations to at least give you a fair opportunity of a place to start. So having said that, definitely check out Randy Newberg's e-scouting series. He does a tremendous job. He did a 12-part series with onX, I think a year or two ago, and then last year he did a 4-part series with one of his cameramen where they were practicing doing an e-scouting for Wyoming. Check that one out. Also, Randy has broken down elk behavior and the needs that elk have into 5 calendar periods during the hunting season. So you have an early season, which is typically in August, pre-rut, which is typically the first week or two of September, the rut, which is right in the middle of September, post-rut, the rut actually is fairly long, so like say from somewhere around the 10th or 15th all the way through the first week of October typically, sometimes later. And then post-rut, which is that end of October, mid to end of October into November. The elk do some different stuff there, and you have a big transition in weather during that time and behavior. And then into the late season, which now pretty much all of the needs that the elk have at that point have shifted dramatically into kind of some survival stuff. So also watch Randy's 5 key calendar time frames or time calendar periods. He does a great job breaking that down and breaking down each of the needs that elk have in those particular calendar periods. and that is largely going to dictate the behavior that you see from the elk. And then that in turn will dictate where in a hunting unit you will find those elk. So reeling all that back in, I just want to, so Randy Newberg, excellent source of information for this scouting part. Corey Jacobsen also has some good information on there. In this day and age, people, a lot of videos kind of are pushing this athlete hunter mentality where you have to go, 10 miles deep and wear your camp on your back and, go in with a 60-pound pack and all this other stuff. I don't subscribe wholeheartedly to that. I think putting in the effort at the computer and with boots on the ground, you will successfully find elk in locations that are more easily accessible. Oftentimes, I think people walk past or through elk to get to those further destinations. Now, you will typically have less pressure in those areas that are further away, but not necessarily more success. And I have found, along with several of my friends, that even though you go further in, you're not necessarily by yourself anymore, because that mentality has been pushed for the last 3 to 5 years so hard. Going further in actually means you went further in and have a lot of pressure still. And it's all highly variable. It really depends on where you're at. But just because you do something doesn't mean that the result is going to be what you thought it was when you're there. So I do believe you need to be in good shape. And the better shape you are in, the better hunting experience you're going to have. But when the day comes that you're out on the mountain, whatever shape you're in is whatever shape you're in at that point, because you're not changing it at that point. So becoming a better athlete is a definite positive, but I don't think you necessarily have to go miles and miles into the backcountry. If that's the experience you want, by all means, have at it. But I don't think it's necessary to kill an elk. So before you dive into your scouting, there's kind of 3 main factors, and they're the same 3 factors that we learned as kids. Kind of where are you going to go? And by that, I mean, what state are you going to go into, and what unit are you going to hunt in, or go into? And those 2 variables, you can pick a state and say, I'm only hunting this state. And you can put in for a zone and say, I'm only hunting this zone. If you're a non-resident, which I'm guessing most of you are in these western states, it can be very difficult to draw a tag in a lot of zones. So if you want guaranteed tags, you can go to one of the few states that have over-the-counter zone or tags, which means you show up in the state and you can buy your license right then and there to go do the hunt that you want to do. It limits where you can go, and it limits what unit you can hunt in, but Colorado and Idaho have some units that are over-the-counter. So if you want to guarantee yourself the opportunity to hunt elk, go check out those states and where those over-the-counter opportunities are. So first you want to figure out where, then you want to figure out what you're hunting, and oftentimes the unit you hunt in will dictate what opportunities you have. And by that I mean, okay, you're hunting elk, yes, but are you going to hunt cow elk? Are you going to hunt bull elk? Or are you going to hunt, the first thing that walks in front of you? Each unit typically has its own regulations regarding what sex of animal you can hunt. Oftentimes, units will have more opportunity for archery hunters and sometimes muzzleloader. But archery hunters, not in all cases, but more typically, your tag is good for any animal. I know that's the case where I hunt here in Wyoming, and I find that to be very beneficial because for me, I'm a meat hunter first, and because of that, I'm willing to take any shot opportunity that is presented to me. My first year or up until I got my first animal, I should say, my mentality was there was no ridge too far, no mountain too high, no valley too deep. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get that first elk. And I kind of joked, but in all seriousness, I would say, if I have to wipe the milk off its mouth, I'm willing to take it, which meant, if it's a calf that gives me the opportunity, I'm going to take a calf. If it's a cow, if it's a bull, whatever. That first good broadside shooting opportunity that I can find, I'm taking it. And keep in mind, if you're not familiar, well, sorry about that. And as I said before, that's probably going to be a common theme. The program I'm using to record this just closed on me because, computers. Anyways, so as I was saying, if you're not really familiar with elk, a calf is still a pretty large animal. They might be somewhere between 150 to 200 pounds, 250 pounds maybe. I mean, it really depends on what time of year it is and where you're at. But there's still a lot of meat to be had from a calf. So, now that I've finally shot an animal, I'm taking calves off of the I don't know what I want to say. I'm not shooting calves anymore unless it's an absolute dire situation. But barring that, I'm still happy to take a cow or any, a spike or a bull of any standing. And I think that that's a good way to go about things, especially if it's your first hunt. Just punch your tag that first time, get it out of the way, be in that situation, live in the moment, get that experience, and then once you get your first animal, go ahead and try and pursue something bigger or better or whatever a trophy is in your mind. But that being said, it's your hunt, not mine. You're free to do whatever the heck you want. That's just my approach. Okay. So after you figure out what you're going to be hunting, then you need to figure out when. Now, a lot of people, this means that their schedule is going to dictate when they can go and how long they can go for. And for some of you that are far away, like if you're in New York or Maine and you want to go elk hunting, maybe it might not be best to go and apply in Washington State or Oregon or Arizona or somewhere where it's a lot further for you to travel, because that's going to cut into your time that you have to hunt. But not necessarily. That's something you're going to have to figure out. But really, when you start looking at the when, I'm going to refer you to Randy Newberg's videos on e-scouting and just elk hunting in general. When it comes down to it, there's really 5 key periods you're going to be looking at, ranging from August all the way through the end of hunting season, and in some states that might be December or January. And those 5 key periods you're going to be looking at are early season, pre-rut, the rut, post-rut, and late season. And Randy goes into in-depth detail on all those and what those mean. But the reason why he has those calendar periods broken out like that is because elk have different needs throughout the year, and they're going to be located wherever they can meet those needs best. And so you need to really figure out when you're going to be hunting, and then what those elk have as a priority during that time frame. And oftentimes, like, for instance, the needs being food, water, safety and security, and breeding. Those are kind of the key components. So oftentimes the most difficult component to get outside of the breeding season is going to be what dictates where an elk is going to be. So if it's water, finding water sources is going to be key. If it's food, finding a food resource is going to be key. Breeding throws everything out the window. It changes drastically during breeding season, but those needs are going to dictate where on the mountain or in that unit animals are going to be. So definitely check out Newberg's 5 calendar periods. It's a great resource. He does a good job breaking things down. And then he also has, going with that, e-scouting videos. He does a whole series with onX. Check that out. I think onX, Google Earth, and Go Hunt are some resources that you should definitely check out and be using. They're going to help you out tremendously as far as figuring out and planning your hunt, figuring out where you're going to go and when you're going to go. and what kind of hunt you really want to do. Also, 2 words of advice that I have fallen prey to. If you go back to my storytelling series, you'll know that I really messed up with this. Is number 1, take advantage of e-scouting. And what I mean by that is use Google Earth, use onxmaps, find a location or the locations in the hunt unit that you're looking at that meet the criteria of the needs of the elk at that point in time that you're going to be hunting. And then there's some general parameters that you can look at as well. So like, for instance, during archery season, typically, not always, weather changes quickly, but typically it's going to be warmer, especially in early part of September or in August. Like last year, it was 95 degrees. When it's that hot, that time of year, elk are already starting to build into their winter coats for starters. The bulls are going to be fighting. And so finding an area where they can escape the heat is going to be a key factor, right? So you're going to be looking on north slopes of mountains, heavy timber, something near a water source, or maybe down in a bottom where the cold air will sink and stay. Like all these factors come together into location. So elk geography is a really key factor, and being able to parse some of that out using Google Earth or onxmaps in combination will really help you get onto elk quicker. So e-scouting is a very big thing. The second part is glassing. Let your glass do the walking for you as much as possible. Or another going hand in hand with that is like during the rut when elk are bugling, use your ears. You know, you can sit on a road at midnight and listen to the elk bugling around in an area and use that to go, okay, I know there's elk in this location. But glass as much as possible to find those animals. Just finding an animal, finding a cow tells you a lot of information. If you can find a herd of cows, that's going to tell you a lot of information. If you can find a single bull, it's going to tell you a lot of information as to what animals are doing and where they're doing it. I have not been privy to this enough. I have not done it enough. I'm not very good at glassing. But especially if you're new to the hunting, new to the mountains, new to the West, save yourself the energy and the heartache and the pain that goes along with just walking through the woods. If you don't have a good idea of where you're headed to and why, or have animals already figured out and located, just walking through the woods, it can be effective, but it's extremely taxing. So if you can find an area where you can glass, try that as well. Now, I've been unfortunate enough that most of the areas where I hunt, the topography is not exaggerated enough or open enough that glassing is really effective. But if you can find those areas and you can find them using Google Earth where you can find a higher point with an open vantage point, and then find the parks and other areas out across the landscape where you can glass, definitely do it. Find an area where you can look into a burn. Find those burns. Burns are going to hold a good nutritional food source year after year after year for a very long time. So find those areas. Any kind of open topography where you can glass. If it's an area that makes elk sense to be looking at, find an area where you can observe that from distance so you don't have to walk and hunt there or walk there before you find the animals. So those are 2 really big things, you know, e-scouting and then using glass to scout for you. Also, if you are new to the Western states, there are several key things you need to be aware of, not specifically elk hunting, but state related. So the laws in the states, in Western states, are typically not very similar to those in the Eastern states. There are more laws, there's more access laws that it can be very problematic. You need to do your homework, and if you have any questions at all, talk to the game and fish departments in the states you're going to be hunting. The last thing you want to do is end up on private land and end up with a felony, as it may be in many states, and several hundred, if not $1,000 fines and loss of privileges and everything else just because you crossed the line. Now, fair or not is not a question of issue. It doesn't matter. The law is the law, and therefore you need to figure it out and be aware of what's going on. If you plead ignorance, you're still going to get a fine. They don't care. So with that, specifically, here's just an idea of what some of the laws that you need to be aware are. So this is for my state of Wyoming. So on state lands. So most public lands, being BLM, Bureau of Rec, Forest Service, any of those type of lands, they're typically open for recreational use and for camping. And if there's not a designated campground, oftentimes you can disperse camp, which means you just pull off the Forest Service road into an opening if you're allowed to take your vehicle off-road. Pay attention to no vehicle access signs and know the rules. But you can just pull off and camp almost anywhere. So that is not true in Wyoming when it comes to state land. So state-owned, state trust lands, you're not allowed to camp on most parcels. So that's something to be aware of, whereas in other states you can. Private roads. So in the West, you'll find there are a lot of roads that are private. Here in Wyoming in particular, there are huge ranches, 50,000 acres plus. They may have roads, and it may show up on Google Earth or a map or onX. But just because the road is there doesn't mean you have permission to drive down that road. And so sometimes you'll see gates, sometimes you'll see posted signs, sometimes you'll see no access signs. But it's your responsibility to know where you can go. With that, sticking on the private property issue, you'll see in a lot of these states that there are huge chunks of land that are 100% locked up by private land surrounding it with no official access point to it. So here in Wyoming, there's over 3 million acres of public land that you as a United States citizen have no access to from the land. You can take a helicopter in or something like that. But as far as walking, driving, or floating access, you do not have access to those lands. It's a crying shame. I'm personally completely against that, and I'm a member of several groups that are trying to gain more access to those things, but that's just how it is. And sometimes, and this is why having onX is important, sometimes that access is only limited by a 50-foot wide stretch of private land blocking you from getting to that. And no, you can't just hop that fence and go over there. Also, you'll find throughout the West that there's a lot of what they call checkerboard land, which means that there is a full section, which is a square mile, of public land, and then right next to it, there's a full section of private land, and then another full section of public land, and it forms a checkerboard pattern. Typically, this is old railroad lands and whatever else, but those private lands you do not have permission on. And in a lot of states, in most states in the West, it is illegal to cross from public land to public land across that corner. So even though you're never touching private land, they've made it illegal for whatever BS reason that you cannot theoretically take a running jump, fly through the air, and land on that other piece of public land. So that's part of the reason why in the state of Wyoming there's over 3 million acres of land that are inaccessible, is because that corner cross rule rules out your ability to access a lot of land. That's just the way it is. So you need to do your research on that stuff. Again, if you have any questions, go talk to the game and fish in that area or the sheriff or whomever. Most of the time, people are really easy to get a hold of, and they're more than happy to tell you the answer to the question that you have. Also in Wyoming, another hit against non-residents, and this, I think Wyoming is the only state I know of that does this, and it's for monetary reasons and guides and, whatever. But the rules are the rules for now. In the state of Wyoming, non-residents are not allowed to hunt in a wilderness area, in a designated wilderness area, without a guide. I know that sucks, and that takes off some really good hunting areas for you non-residents, but unless you're willing to hire a guide, you can't hunt those areas. Or if you know somebody who lives in Wyoming who's willing to serve as your guide, that's another in. But for just the standalone regular person, unfortunately, unless you're willing to pay somebody, you can't go hunt a wilderness area. I'm hoping they change that law someday, but for now, that's kind of the way it is. Vehicle access, so we talked about roads and private roads, but also, a lot of Forest Service and BLM, you're not allowed to take. I don't care if you have an all-terrain vehicle or a Jeep or a jacked-up vehicle or whatever. It kind of pisses me off when I see tire tracks all over hell and back, ripping up shit just because people don't want to follow the rules. I get it, rules suck, but I'd much rather have a nice, forest or desert or whatever than just to see people out there ripping ass around stuff, tearing shit up because they feel that, nobody else cares about it. And oftentimes it's people who don't even live here who do this stupid stuff. But if you have a vehicle and it says no vehicle access beyond whatever point, that doesn't mean, well, that just means I can't drive down this road and all I have to do is drive around the fence and go through the woods or whatever. No, that means don't take your vehicle down there. Get off your lazy ass, walk out into wherever you're going to go, and leave your vehicle where you're supposed to. Okay, get off my soapbox on that one. Most states also have some cooperative programs where private land will be open to public access. And there are a list of rules that you have to abide by when using that private land. So in Wyoming, we have a walk-in program, and it will be that piece of land is not public, it's private. And so because of that, the rules that often go with that are it's species specific. So you can only go on this land to hunt these particular species. You can only use these weapons, and you can only hunt from this date to this date for that species. And it varies from piece to piece. So if you're going to use that program, you need to read the rules that go along with those so that we can keep those pieces of land open for public hunting use. And, I'll be damned if any of you are out there, shitting out there, literally taking a shit and not covering it up or throwing your trash around or whatever. Like, that's how we lose access to these pieces of land. Or if you're just acting like an idiot and driving out into the middle of private property or doing something like that, like, it's not your land, okay? So treat it with some respect and go out there and take advantage of it for sure. We use a lot of those walk-in areas when it comes to antelope hunting. It's a great resource to have, and every year the Game and Fish Department here in Wyoming, I know, is trying to gain more access to more land, and sometimes having that walk-in will provide access to some of that landlocked public land, which is also nice. So, that's another option. Check it out. But bottom line is know the rules of whatever state you're going into because they're all going to be a little bit different. So, getting away from, actually, you know what? There's one more thing I want to talk about. So, if you're not using a guided hunt system, meaning you're not paying for private access to a private ranch or for a hunting guide, there's a couple of things I want you to be aware of. Number one, when you're out hunting on public lands, it's going to be you and often a couple 10 to 100 of your closest, not closest friends. Like, public land's public, and there's a lot of people out hunting these days. And as access to land shrinks, that means there's more and more crowding. So, and especially like doing what I'm doing right now, YouTube has opened up people's awareness of people's honey holes and whatever else. So at no point should you ever really think you're probably going to have this all to yourself, because the likelihood is not. And even if you do hire a guide, most often you're hiring that guide for the luxury of not having to deal with camp yourself and for their knowledge of a specific area. But most guiding operations are still taking place on public land. So you may have paid somebody for a guiding service, and people who didn't will still come and hunt the same area that you are in. So that's something to be aware of. There's a lot of people out there, so you need to be sure of your shots and stuff, but treat everybody with respect. Don't be a dick to somebody else. Oftentimes, if you can, I suggest helping out somebody. You can make a good friendship that way. But just know that when you're doing public land hunting, you're probably going to run into people. Now, you can use that as a strategy to figure out where the pressure is going to be and how that pressure is going to impact animal movements, and start making some strategies that way. Again, Newberg has a good video talking about that, but just expect that you're not going to have the woods to yourself wherever you go. I don't mean that to discourage you from going, but it's another factor. Other things to think about while you're doing your e-scouting is weather. What kind of year is it? You might want to look at the months, the summer months leading up to your hunt. Was it a wet year in that area, or was it a dry year in that area? Was there a burn or a fire, in the previous year or that particular year? We've had a lot of fires out west here in the last couple of years, and that definitely changes how animals move and where they're going to be. So you need to, pay attention to some of that stuff. And then the other big one is grazing. Know that most public lands here in the West are open for ranchers to graze via permit. So oftentimes, even up in the woods, up in the forests, up in the mountains, you are going to find cattle and sheep out in the middle of nowhere. No matter how far away from the road you get, you're probably going to run across cattle and stuff depending on the time of year. The fact that there are animals out there act as pressure also on those animals, because it's pressure for the resources, for the food, for the water. And so knowing or predicting where those grazing allotments are going to be and where animals are going to be and when they're going to be there are also key factors you're going to want to kind of keep in the back of your mind. So what all this is leading up to is pretty simple. Basically, there's a ton of information that you should be aware of. Break it down into chunks, and why I'm posting this video now in March is because now is when you want to start your process of narrowing things down, breaking things down, selecting states and stuff. Now, you may have already missed draw deadlines for several states, which is unfortunate. But again, there's still 2 states. You can always do an over-the-counter hunting if you really want to go. But you need to start thinking about this, and I encourage you to learn as much as you're comfortable with about elk habits and behavior and geography of the area where you're going or planning to hunt. It will be invaluable to you. Luckily, there's no shortage of YouTube videos out there right now kind of describing all of this stuff. This is just going to be one more. But the more studious you are, the more information you have, I guarantee you the more success you will have. And it'll cut that learning curve down dramatically. Go back to my stories, listen to how many mistakes I made, how ignorant I was when I first started. I am not boasting that I am the end-all, be-all, or have all the answers right now when it comes to elk hunting. I've only just killed 2 elk. I've been fortunate enough that they were back-to-back year after year, but I am no way thumping my chest saying I'm great at hunting or anything like that. I feel like I have a good grasp of the information and how animals act and calling and stuff like that, but I know there's still a lot for me to learn, but go out and start learning that stuff. What I really think that is why I have been successful the last 2 years, was I really buckled down. Randy Newberg always references a book called Elk Ecology of North America or something like that. I bought that book. It's this thick, and it's just a plethora of information. I've read through that pretty thoroughly. I've watched all these YouTube videos by many different people. I've learned how to call. I've learned different strategies. I've tried some out-of-the-box ideas, and I highly encourage you to do the same. It'll go a long way. So with that, I think I am going to, one last thing. I forgot about this. This part's another important part. So after you've done all the e-scouting and your glassing and whatever, there's one final piece of information, and that is when you're actually out hunting, the boots on the ground part, right? So this is probably more important for hunting during the rut time frame, so like early season, pre-rut, and during the rut. Don't overlook the opportunity of being out in the woods to continue your scouting, right? So you want to find water sources. Make sure that they're actually viable water sources. Just because there's a pin on the map doesn't mean that it's actually going to be viable, especially in a dry year. Keep your eyes open when you start walking through parks and stuff for elk scat. If it's fresh, that tells you something that there's elk there and have been there very recently. That's a huge piece of information. Tracks and how the tracks are coming together will tell you a lot of information and how fresh they are. Wallows, very important. Oftentimes they are a water source, but it's a very important ritual that elk utilize during the rut. So if you find a wallow, especially one that has fresh mud splashed everywhere, you know that there's a bull in the area. Also, the big one for me are rubs, right? So if I'm hunting a new area and I find that there are elk rubs all over the place, and I find there are old elk rubs all over the place, and new elk rubs all over the place, and various years of elk rubs all over the place, you know you're in the vicinity of a place that elk utilize year after year after year for rutting behavior. So that's a big piece of information for you. If you go to a ridge and there's only one rub and it's small and it's fresh from this year, that's good. That means a bull passed by there, but that doesn't mean he's coming back. But if you find those areas where there's sign from all sorts of years and stuff, you know that you can kind of bet that there's going to be animal activity in there year after year after year. Now, if you're fortunate enough to be able to go hunting in an area, in a unit, let's say, for multiple years, you will find over time that there are certain places on that mountain that elk will use year after year after year. Now, this ridge might be perfect, and this ridge might be perfect, but they use this ridge and they don't use this one. There's some variable there that maybe is inconceivable to us or imperceivable to us, but there's something separating those two ridges out as why they go to this place and not this place, even though to our human eyes, all things being equal, like they're the same exact ridge, right? For whatever reason, they're not, and whatever that reason is, it doesn't matter. You can figure out that this is the area where they're going to be. So definitely check, keep your eyes open as you're walking through the woods. Find the elk trails, find the fresh sign, and then find those areas where they're going to be rutting. That'll help you out a lot. So definitely don't overlook the fact that while you're out hunting, you should be gathering information as well. So with that, I think I am going to leave it there. This video has gone on for long enough. Again, I want to reiterate onX, Google Earth, and Go Hunt as being some really good resources for you to check out. Again, I'm going to throw a lot of stuff down in the description of this video down below as far as links to other people to check out. Randy Newberg being one of the key ones when it comes to this scouting stuff. Go ahead, pick yourself up a bottle of this 1783 Evan Williams if you think that those tasting notes were something you'd be interested in. If not, you want to do it for $1.50 cheaper or whatever, check out that black label. It's just as good. And with all that, I'm sorry for the interruption in the middle of this video. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead, put them in the comment section below. Please like and subscribe to this channel, and I'll do my best to help answer any questions that you might have. And we'll see where this thing goes. So follow through. The next video, we'll talk about meat care and packing out, and we'll kind of wrap up things. And hopefully, it'll be valuable for you in the future. So have yourselves a great day, and thanks for watching.